are so pleased, as always, to be joined by Barry Gold to talk to him about actually a couple of books. He's got a new one's coming out, but we're going to talk about We're Overdosed. And boy, oh boy, this is such an important book, and I'm so thrilled to have him here on Author's Corner with us. So Barry, thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.
Let's talk about the road to We're Overdosed. And first of all, what made you decide, hey, I got to write this book?
Well, for one thing, I'm a pharmacologist. So what else am I going to write about except drugs?
Right.
What do I know? I know drugs,
Right.
and a little about parenting, uh, given that I have three. I sat down and started researching the history of opium because I'm a history nut. I tell the story. I was in Dresden, Germany, running to a meeting at a German pharmaceutical company, and I saw a brass plaque on the wall, and I am not afraid to describe myself as a brass plaque junkie. And I stopped to read it. It was in German, but I understood it. And it said aspirin was invented here, and I was fascinated. Well, I did a little research 20 years later and found out that the fellow who discovered aspirin or invented aspirin invented heroin. And I thought, that's fascinating. And how did he do it? He was adding acetic acid. Well, we know that as vinegar.
Wow.
And he was adding acetic acid to chemicals to see if he could invent something. And he came up with aspirin because he added acetic acid to salicylic acid and made acetyl salicylic acid, aspirin. And he added it to morphine and made what he called in German heroisch. Makes me feel heroisch. Well, what's that in English? Heroic. So it's heroin.
Wow. Same person.
Same guy, 3 weeks apart.
Oh, crazy. And you think of heroin and you think of how that had a grip on so many people, black tar heroin, all the different variations. And the meat of your book, I mean, We're Overdosed. Tell us about that. What do you mean about We're Overdosed?
Well, I wanted to write about opium, but I didn't want to be accusatory to my readership.
Right.
I wanted to say, hey, folks, we're in this together. My job is to teach you. We're overdosed. And I'm speaking to my readership saying, it's not you, it's us.
Right.
Us, the third part of my memoir.
What's the biggest concern with that? Because obviously we look around and we see what the statistics are. It's so grim.
Well, the story has changed rapidly in the last decade. And today, the biggest killer is not heroin, it's fentanyl.
Mm.
And the sad thing about fentanyl is, although we bring it in from Mexico, or the Mexican drug cartels export it into the U.S. in trailers and hollows in cars, and not on the backs of immigrants. Although they're using drones now too. They dropped the heroin in Texas or Arizona. Nothing like technology. And so 70% of the deaths every year now have fentanyl in their bloodstream.
Wow.
Someone asked me, are the Chinese at war with us? And I said, this is an act of war. You try to poison another people, that's an act of war.
Yeah.
So I'm fully expect to not eat in a Chinese restaurant in the near future.
So in We're Overdosed, I mean, you have the pedigree for writing this kind of a book. Tell the people who are watching this more about your background and how you ended up in Germany and working for that company and in that spot where you saw that plaque.
Oh, I started life teaching medical school and discovered that it really wasn't for me. I taught 4 hours a year. It wasn't enough. And I was losing interest in being a lab manager. So I moved into the pharmaceutical industry, still managing a lab, but this time an anesthetics lab. Well, that lasted six years too, because they said to me, your heart's not in this. I said, fine, I'm out of here. And I went to work for an American company in drug development. And they called me Director of Project Management. Why project management? Because we managed by interdisciplinary teams, and I led the teams. And then I had to report to the board of directors. That was the not fun part of it. And I, oh, they sold the division, and I was about to lose my job. So I called my headhunter, and she said, listen, I have an opportunity with a German company. They're called Knoll Pharmaceuticals, Knoll auf Deutsch, Knoll. They don't exist anymore because they were a subsidiary of BASF, the largest chemical company in the world.
Yeah.
Badische Anilin und Soda Fabrik. I'm practicing German. I have to be there in October. And I used to work there, so I knew German, but I've forgotten it in 20 years. So I'm working on it, and my 15-year-old is going with me. Should be
Wow.
a lot of fun. So
Wow.
I went to work doing the same job, managing projects, drug development for a German company, for Knoll. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. I used to work in Ludwigshafen, which is an hour south of Frankfurt, but I stayed in Heidelberg, which is an hour south of Ludwigshafen. But I had dinner in Strasbourg, France, because that's an hour south of Heidelberg. And how can you resist eating Alsatian food, driving 100 miles an hour in a European country?
Exactly. You definitely had fun there. And you obviously liked what you did too. What was the most fascinating part of that?
I think the most fascinating part of it was learning that Germans always thought I was German. Herr Gold, you have no accent. And the French always looked at me and said, ah, Amerikaner. They knew immediately. I didn't have to open my mouth. And that was the most fascinating part of it, was living in the German economy a week at a time and enjoying it. Just, this is nice. I like this.
And what you worked on, because again, with the compounds, with what you did specifically,
It
that
was
led
interesting
you.
what I worked on.
Yeah.
I worked on Dilaudid, which is hydromorphone. It's an opiate. And we tried to make a 24-hour formulation of it. And I was developing that for the whole time I was with them. They knew I knew a lot about opiates, and my PhD dissertation was on alcohol. So I've been in drug abuse, so to speak, all my life. And I capitalized on it. And I enjoyed working for them. In fact, I have a friend who still we correspond every week, and I'm going to see him in October when I go over.
Wow.
So
Wow.
he's a former regulatory affairs expert on my teams.
Wow. And again, we're speaking with Barry Gold, and the name of the book is We're Overdosed. And you found the history, you're looking back into the history, like you said, you're a history buff of opium. What did you learn that you did not know?
Well, I didn't know where opium came from. And it turned out it comes from an area, I guess we would call it the Levant, uh, the Mediterranean area, the Eastern Mediterranean area. Was it known to the early Israelis? No. Was it known to the early Jordanians? Yes. So somewhere in there, opium started. And how did it get to America? They traded with us, and the colonists found out that they liked this stuff, so they paid more. And of course, Britain got in trouble with the Opium Wars with the Chinese, and it's a fascinating history, the
Yeah.
way it spread around the world.
And as you mentioned, fentanyl now is the thing, but there still is definitely heroin use. And at one point, it was way over the top where you had so many high school students that had access to black tar heroin and so many, many, many deaths. And I think it's partially it's the way, obviously, it makes someone feel, as you said in German, that feeling that was captured in that drug that was so addictive.
Heroic. It makes them feel heroic.
Yeah.
It removes most feelings. The interesting thing is, if you speak to former drug users and say, why'd you start? The answer is always the same thing. I felt lousy. I needed something to take the lousy feeling away. Well, if you drill in and say, what was that lousy feeling? I walk away saying, it's loneliness.
Mm,
Because we live in an asocial society. We all stare at screens all day and don't talk to each other.
right.
And that's not that's not the way we are. We're social animals.
Yeah.
I tell my 15-year-old all the time, this is a good idea. Go out for sports. It's social.
Right. Be involved.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I tell addicts, if you feel terrible, go find a crowd and walk through it. You'll feel better.
Yeah. That's great advice. Do you work with addicts? Have you done that? Have you volunteered?
I taught a course to addicts, to recovering addicts. It's in the book. It's my first chapter.
Sure.
This was a long time ago. I was still traveling to Europe every other week. And I came in on a weekend and I had signed up to teach a course called Pharmacology of Drugs of Abuse to recovering addicts at Jersey City State College. I think it's a different name now, New Jersey State University or something. I don't know. And we broke for lunch, and I went down and sat at lunch, and all my class followed me down and sat around me. And I thought, oh, I'm flattered. They like me. And they leaned over and said, why do you teach us? I said, why? For me, it's payback. I like teaching you. I share my knowledge with you, and I give you strategy. Why do you ask? Because only addicts are interested in us. And I
Wow.
thought, that is pathetic. And that stayed with me for 20 years, and that became my first chapter.
Wow. That is pathetic thinking of
It's
that.
pathetic. Nobody cares about addicts. They're people of lower character. Why should we worry about it? I use the example. Think back COVID 2 years ago. What was on the news every night? Pictures of us wearing masks. My son Zoomed his schoolwork. We didn't go to work. We just stayed home and tried not to infect each other. I got COVID anyway. And I was in San Francisco and I got COVID. Wonderful trip. And you bring that to today. What's on the news at night? There's not a mention of opium, even though we're killing almost twice as many as we did with
Yeah.
COVID. COVID was on the news. Addicts are not on the news. And I think that's pathetic. We're treating addicts as though they're not important, and we're treating COVID victims as though they're important. Well, the reverse is true. Addicts only want to help people now, recovering addicts. They don't want people following them into this addiction street. And COVID victims are cursing the Chinese for giving us opium.
When people read We're Overdosed, which you can get on Barnes and Noble, get there, get on Amazon, all the usual places, what do you hope, Barry, they take away?
Well, I want people to become active. I don't want you to say, there's nothing I can do for these people. Of course there is. Find a Narcotics Anonymous meeting and go in and say, I made dinner. Would anybody like some? Do it. Don't be afraid. People will gobble up your food. If you find an addict on the street and he's unconscious, dial 911 and get the ambulance there to give him Narcan. Narcan is administered by nasal insufflation. They spray it up the addict's nose and they magically save him. If you have a family member who's an addict, Don't beat your breast and say, what should I do? I can't do anything with this kid. Yes, you can. You can say to him, would you like to get clean? I'll help you. Find out where the nearest rehab is, give him the address. You've done more for that child than you could ever do. Just get active. Just be an active American. Do what you can do.
Great.
Family, class, stranger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sage advice, great advice, actually. So you've written We're Overdosed, and now you have a taste for writing, and you've got another book that's coming out, Boomer Dad, A Lifetime of Resiliency, Endurance, and Disconnection. Give us a tease of that. What's this book about?
Well, let's see. 25 years ago, when I was traveling to Europe every other week and exhausted, and I began to think, what am I doing here? I also suffered a heart attack. I was 52 years old. I was looking at a house. I had a heart attack right in the driveway. I drove myself to the hospital. I said, I'm having a heart attack. A week later, I was in open heart surgery. Well, that kind of changed my life. I decided traveling to Europe threatened my life. And 3 weeks after my open heart surgery, when I was still seeping a little bread stuff out of where they cut me, I went skin diving in Mexico. I took my European colleagues snorkeling in the Gulf of Mexico. And they looked at me and said, isn't it a little soon for you to go? I said, I'm fine. And I'm swimming along, staring at a beautiful bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. And I see a barracuda looking for lunch. And I said, you know what? This is stupid. And I got back in the boat. That's resiliency.
I like it. That's resiliency. And the book is about all those things, the things that happen to you, what it's like being a boomer dad. You mentioned you have a 15-year-old right now. Yeah.
I have a 50-year-old and a 48-year-old also. Yeah, well, that's a product of two marriages.
Yeah.
And I never expected to end up single parenting, though. And I'm single parenting my 15-year-old 4 days a week.
Wow.
So he goes to his mom on weekends.
What's that like?
It's a lot of work. It's tiring. He comes to me 9:30 at night and says, Dad, can you do a load of wash? Richard, I don't want to fold laundry at 11 o'clock at night. I'll do it in the morning. But I'm doing all these housework things that I guess I'm good at. I don't know.
Right. Was it fun for you to write Boomer Dad?
No, Boomer Dad, I struggled. It was fun to write We're Overdosed because it had a higher purpose, if you will.
Right.
And plus, it was my first book, so I really had to finish it. Boomer Dad, one of my readers said to me, you got to do a memoir. You have to. It's your legacy. So I started it, and I struggled with it, and I wrote 10,000 words, and then I had to finish Boomer Dad, and now I have to market Boomer Dad. And finally, I did it. 69,000 words.
Wow.
Finished it. And people have read it and said to me, hey, this is pretty inspirational. I said, really? You mean I nailed it? And they said, yeah, you've had a hell of a life. So I wrote Boomer Dad.
Nice. I like the contrast of the two books, and it's always delightful to talk to you. Barry Gold, you are an inspiration. And again, we talked about, you're overdosed. We're overdosed, actually. We're overdosed. And Boomer Dad, of course, coming up. And again, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure is mine. Pleasure is mine. And my third book, I have a proposal into my agent.
We'll wait for that one. I like it. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.